Welcome to the Married People Podcast, where we help you make marriage real, fun, and simple. Each week, we have honest conversations about one simple thing that can make your marriage better. Because when your marriage is better, everything's better. I'm CJ, and sitting around the table today, we have our resident newlywed, Afton.
Hi.
And our 22-year marriage veteran. He's an author, speaker, and director of marriedpeople.org, Ted Lowe.
Hey, everybody.
And today on the Married People Podcast, we're going to look at a question that maybe you've thought about before and maybe you haven't. And the question today is, can your spouse really meet all of your relational needs? Now, there's some research done by Dr. David and Teresa Ferguson, and they've identified 10 relational needs. So let's see if you've ever felt any of these relational needs before. Acceptance, affection, appreciation, approval, attention, comfort, encouragement, respect, security, and then the final one, support. That's all 10 relational needs. Ted, that is a lot of relational needs.
Yeah, it's a ton. And I think, unpacking these just a little bit, because, for us guys, sometimes we're like, I don't have all these.
Yeah, like, I don't need all these things, or I don't feel all those relational needs.
Right. Well, let's take a quick look at them. Like with acceptance, we've all made big mistakes and we don't want to feel rejected. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just that simple. It's like, I want to feel accepted with the good, the bad, and the ugly of me.
Yeah.
So I think that's all legitimate. Affection, it's when we show care and closeness with, different caring words, with physical things, that it's just we're affectionate with each other. We all need someone, again,
we desire that affection.
Totally. And we talked about kindness last time, last episode, and that's just part of that. Appreciation. I mean, don't we all want to be appreciated for what we do? I know it's huge for men. One of the most powerful things that a wife can say to her husband is, I really, really appreciate you. I mean, that's statistically, the studies said that is what a man is craving to hear more than anything, that he'd rather have that than love. Is it approval, that we're valuing the other person and we feel valued in a special way? I approve of you.
Yeah.
There's attention. We want to know that our spouse or people around us, that they're attentive.
Yeah.
We matter.
That you matter more than Candy Crush.
I want all the attention when I get home.
You want all the attention? Yeah, well, at least Hudson knows, right?
Yeah.
At least he knows.
That's my number one relational need is attention.
Yeah.
Everyone.
And you let Hudson listen to these before they go live, so this kind of gives him...
I debrief him.
Right, there
I'd probably paint myself in a better light than when they actually come out.
Then there's comfort. We want to be given strength and hope, that there's somebody around us when things are tough, that we're feeling loved and cared for. Mm-hmm. Encouragement. Again, we want people, hey, help me get to my goals, encourage me to do that. Respect, I think, is huge. We have ideas and things, and we want to be valued. Security, we want to feel free from harm, or just, basic needs. I know for women, especially, one of the core fears is fear.
Yeah.
The core thing is I feel unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's true, because at night when we're laying in bed and I hear something that I think is a murderer in the kitchen, he's definitely the one to go make sure it's not a murderer.
Exactly.
And he makes sure our house is secure.
So basically what you're saying, Ted, is that we all have these relational needs and they're not always getting met.
Right.
And the question we're asking today is, can your spouse really meet all of those things? So let me just ask you, can your spouse meet these, and should your spouse meet all of these 10 relational needs?
I think the quick answer is no.
Okay.
For us to think that another person can meet all these very legitimate needs.
Yeah, these aren't bad needs to have.
No, they're part of it. I believe it's how God's wired us, is to have these relational needs so that we'll stay connected. If we didn't have them, we would live in isolation. And so I think this is one of the things He's wired in us, that we do have these relational needs, but it gets really tricky, and I think it's borderline impossible for us to think that our spouse can meet all these needs.
So I guess for me, though, when I hear that list, like acceptance, affection, encouragement, respect, like, I do expect Hudson to be all 10 of those things for me. And I honestly don't see why that's wrong. Like, if he wasn't respectful towards me, we would have big issues. And also for me, attention here is like, okay, if I don't feel appreciated by him for whatever reason, is it okay to go find that appreciation somewhere else? Because for me, that rings a lot of like red alert bells, like,
Right.
because that's always the thing you hear, like, don't go get your needs met somewhere else.
Right. It has
Right?
a very negative connotation to get these things fulfilled
met
in you or
elsewhere.
met anywhere other than your spouse.
Yeah, and absolutely. And, every episode we want to talk about things that matter. And I hear exactly what you're saying and have to agree 100% that we should not be getting those legitimate needs met in illegitimate ways. That's not what we're saying here. I think what we're saying, yes, we would love to have all these things from our spouse. And when they're not there, do we have great conversations about it? Absolutely. I think if you think about the reality of people's world right now, for you that are listening, you know that your day is full and you come home and you're tired and your spouse is tired and they're sitting here with all these needs. The capacity sometimes for our spouse to be able to pull that off, it's really difficult. I mean, we've talked about, all of our lives. I have 3 kids. You have a stepson, CJ, you're married and got a, very packed out job. We all do. It is coming home and leaning into that person as they walk through the door with our arms open and the eyes saying, okay, sock it to me. These are all the needs that I have. I just think it's impossible.
And I get what you're saying, though, Afton, that like I expect my spouse to meet all of these things in me. But to Ted's point, like if I walk in the door and I'm not getting all 10 of these things from Terry, like it almost sets a bad tone.
I think it goes back and forth, though. Like, I don't think you walk in the door and you're like, I need acceptance and affection and appreciation and approval and attention right now.
Yeah.
Like, I don't feel that when I walk in the door, but when I walk in, I feel like there are at least one of these things that I feel like I need at that moment. And it might be encouragement, and it might be affection, and it might just be approval, and it might just be comfort. But I do expect to get them in my house.
But I feel like the problems emerge, though, when you still expect to get something, one of these or a couple of these when you walk in the door. And what I was trying to say that is just like, it sets a negative tone, though, if you don't. And so I guess the question for Ted is it okay to expect those, or is it okay to expect a few of them from your spouse, or is it just setting you up for failure to walk in the door and expect, 4 out of the 10 or something?
Right. I think if we think about it like this, is if you're thinking about you have a cup that's empty that represents the relational needs, that if we're thinking about pouring into that cup to meet those needs, should your spouse do that? I believe God wants to use your spouse more than anybody to do that. But if we think about this term, if we could get it from other places, legitimate places, healthy people, then that's a different thing. And so your cup, you're coming in with a more full cup for your spouse that they're not trying to meet all the time. And we all know needy people, right? We've all got needy people in our lives, and we get it. And sometimes they're the most difficult ones that we want to meet their needs. Isn't that ironic? Like I worked in youth ministry forever, and there'd be kids that were the neediest, were the most difficult to deal with. And I think when a spouse is super, super needy, or I want you to do all of this by yourself, that it's too difficult for them.
It's like a parent-child relationship almost.
It absolutely is. And what we're saying is no. I think, when we're thinking about it in terms of like what Ted Lowe is supposed to give Nancy Lowe, I need to look at this list and think I need to do everything possible to help meet those needs. Absolutely. But what becomes more healthy, and I think this is the truth of what we're talking about today, is that God wants to meet those needs through our relationship with Him and through a village of people and not just a spouse.
So I want to go back to, you said you can get some of these things fulfilled in you or met, and these needs met in you from your spouse, but also other legitimate places versus illegitimate places. Can you explain what you mean when you say like, the legitimate versus illegitimate? Right.
Well, here's a great example. There's a great book out by Dr. Sue Johnson called Hold Me Tight. And she says this. I want to read you a little clip of the book. Most of us no longer live in supportive communities with our birth families and childhood friends close at hand. Because what do, guys? We
move away.
We move away. And she says, we work longer and longer hours. We commute further and further distances, and thus have fewer and fewer opportunities to develop close relationships. Now watch this. She says, most often, the couples I see in my practice live in a community of 2. Inevitably, we now ask our lovers for the emotional connection and sense of belonging that my grandmother got from a village. We used to live in a village, guys. We did. And I believe when you think about biblical times and even not 100 years ago, that's what people did. They lived with a connection. They were surrounded by family. They were surrounded by close friends. And now
and collectively, they all met some of those relational needs in each other, as opposed to living isolated lives as couples, relying 100% on each other to meet all of these relational needs.
Exactly. So, guy has a tough day at work. He's coming home, frustrated, sees his brother. How are you, buddy? Well, it was a really tough day today. And walks in, his wife, how was your day today? It was okay. Yeah. Because that need got met from his brother. And I'm not saying that we don't need to get our needs met by our spouse. What she's saying and what studies are showing is we're trying to get too much from just one other person, that marriage was not designed to be just getting your needs met with one other person, that God has a village mentality.
I'm still under the impression that if I wasn't receiving these things from Hudson, I feel like there would be an issue. If I didn't feel respected by him and I only felt respected from my boss, I'd have an issue with that.
Is it like a level of all of this stuff, Ted? Because that is kind of where I'm thinking too, is like, you expect a level of respect and acceptance and affection from Hudson all the time. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if maybe this is more speaking to the spikes when you walk in the door, or the spikes that, of attention you need or encouragement you need or whatever, throughout the day.
No.
But there is like a healthy level of, well, you should be getting all of these things from your spouse at a certain level, because like to your point, Afton, you don't want to get no attention and no respect and no encouragement from your spouse and be getting that, fulfilled in you by other people.
And I think what we're talking about, and here's what I don't want you to hear me saying, is that, hey, your spouse can't meet these. They've got to be met. Go find somebody that will meet them or a different way. These would definitely be, these 10 relational needs, they would be a great chart for us to look at our relationship and the health of our relationship. Mm-hmm. And are you feeling these things from your spouse? Absolutely, 100%. And if one of them's really off, if you're feeling disrespected, Afton, that's a huge thing that needs to be addressed, needs to be talked about. At the end of the day, I think we're talking about quantity here, that we're talking about that there needs to be other people that are pouring into that. If we walk in feeling more respected, we're not in a cycle of feeling disrespected. So let's say you at work, you do feel respected, and your kids are respectful for you. You've got a more full tank. And so if your wife is having a really bad day and she maybe rolls her eyes and doesn't have the most respectful response, you're not running off of empty at that point.
Yeah.
What I've watched so many times, especially with men, is this. They use their wife's mood as a barometer of how well they're doing.
Yeah.
And so their wife can only correct response that she can have is, I'm happy, I'm content, because he sees that this is something that I'm doing wrong. That's a guy that's getting all his worth and trying to get all his relational needs met by his wife, and it's exhausting. I told a dear friend of mine, a couple of years ago, and I said, buddy, it's not fair to think that your wife can only have one emotion. It's not about you sometimes. And so if we feel those needs are met through other members, to use, a Christian term, other members of the body, then we're more full and we're not as needy. We're not grasping as hard. Do I think that our spouse needs to be these things and we need to have conversations about these things and these are fair expectations? Absolutely. We're just talking about what would happen, and that's just what I would just, maybe some of our listeners aren't totally buying this either. That's totally fine, because we're not all going to agree on everything. But the idea is, what would happen if you started getting those relational needs by your connection with God and connection with other people? What would that do to your connection with your spouse?
It's like it gives you, when you get some of those I'm tracking more with what you're saying now. It's like when you get some of those needs met by the village or the body or whatever, it gives you, and this isn't a word we've used yet, but it gives you grace in the moments when you're not getting some of those things from your spouse, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've got a dear buddy, and sometimes I'll text him and go, I just need to hear your voice. And what ends up happening, we end up laughing, and I end up sharing some insecurities with him or some things that are going on. and he can meet those needs. When we first got married, I heard a guy say, don't go home every day. And he was talking just to men. I think it's true for women too. He says, don't go in at the end of the day and dump truck load everything that went wrong onto your spouse. It's too much for them to handle. And when we first got married, I would do that with Nancy. And I would watch, and I'm venting about people. And then, it's all gone. It's all off of me. Then she'd see those people and she was cold. And I'd be whoa. Let's don't do that. But see, now she's owning my inadequacies at that point. I think we need to talk to our spouse. I think we need to be real with our spouse. But I definitely know that for me to come in and be in great mood and to be fun and not to be so heavy is really good for my marriage. And that happens when I have other people that can own some of this, that can meet some of these needs, that can support and comfort and say, hey, I do approve of you, And
I think for us, for me and Hudson, I feel like I definitely come home and dump on him if it's a day where I need to do that, And I think what I'm getting out of this conversation for me personally is just like, I feel like your spouse should be the person that you originally get all of these things from. Like, all of these things originate from Hudson. Like, if I'm having a rough day, I go home and I talk to him. But if he's not in the situation or he doesn't know those people, then our conversation only goes so far. And then I think in those ways, that's when I go, okay, I got some kind of acceptance and approval and encouragement from Hudson, but I still feel like I need to talk to somebody about this. And that's when I'll go to a girlfriend and I'll be like, hey, can we go out tomorrow night? Because I just feel like I need to talk through this or talk through the situation I'm in, and maybe you can help me. And maybe that's like more the practical side for me of how I'm viewing it. Like, it needs to originate with your spouse. But if you feel like there is some kind of relational need that still has not been met, then you go the extra mile and bring in other people, bring in your village.
Right.
Yeah. Well, so Ted, this has been a great conversation, but we've talked about these 10 relational needs and where we're getting these needs met and that kind of a thing. What should we take away from this conversation now?
I think the truth is this, that God wants to meet our needs through our relationship with him and a village of people.
Okay.
So let's think about that. If you're sitting down at a table and you've got sitting down with your relational needs, picture you're sitting down, not a table for 2, but a table for 6, 7, 8. It's a different relationship. And so I think for me, like when I think about my relational needs as a believer, I feel like number one comes from my relationship with God. When I sit down in the mornings, and people connect with God in different ways, when I sit down with God in the morning and I focus and I allow him to give me perspective and to pray and to process, it postures me in a less needy way of Nancy. I've got those needs met from him. And so it's just, God wants to meet some of my relational needs through Nancy, but not all of them. So God meets my relational needs. And who are those other people? If you're thinking about who's sitting around your table, like who are those other people that you can do life with? We did vacation with some of our dearest friends. And when we sit down with them on vacation, we laugh. It doesn't matter where we go. We just eat here and then we leave and we go eat here and then we leave and go eat here. And it's been so funny watching over the years, this guy that's been invested into my life who thinks that sitting down at a table and talking and laughing and hanging out is powerful. And it really, really is. There's something when you leave, when you've been around a good group of people that your spouse is a part of, that's just so powerful. That just meets a lot of needs, and you walk away full. Yeah. We walk away really full, like with food too. But you walk away in a different type of full, of feeling like these needs are met, and you're not as needy.
Yeah.
It's a relief for me to hear you say that, because I feel like a lot of times and especially when I heard this question, I'm like, oh, I know what he's going to do. He's going to do that. He's going to do that thing where it's like, no, your spouse can't meet all your needs. Only God can. Right. And like, yes, I believe that's true. God does fill our needs. But I also am a Christian that have experienced places in my spiritual life where it's like, sometimes you feel God's distance. He's distant from you, or like he's being quiet, or, you pray and maybe you didn't hear anything back. And so I feel like whenever I hear those answers that are like, well, just pray to him more, just talk to him more, and he's going to fill it. I hate to be the person that's like,
but
what if he doesn't?
Wrong, yeah.
Right. But what if you don't feel that? Or what if he, for some reason, you didn't feel a need met by him? just to kind of like, I just hate that like pray it away answer because I just don't feel like that is 100% foolproof all the time.
I think you're right. I mean, we've had a lot of grief in our life. And when you lose somebody suddenly, like, and not everybody, a lot of people rush to God really quickly. My experience has been where I distance myself a little bit. I feel, not that God did it, but there's something into me intuitively like going, I need a little distance because I'm hurt because you could have stopped this. And I know better, and intellectually I can wrap my head around that. But God has sent his people around me to meet that. And that's all we're saying here. Does your spouse meet your needs? Absolutely. Just don't put that huge expectation of needs only God can meet through a lot of people, through more people in our life.
So God wants to meet our needs through the people around us, the village around us, which includes our spouse and includes these other people and includes just our relationship with him, with God. And so, Ted, what's the one simple thing that you want us to take away from this conversation this week? Because there's a lot there.
Sure. Yeah, for this week, the one simple thing that we're going to give you, we're actually going to give you 3 options for that, because we know that people are at different places relationally and spiritually. So we're going to give you a couple of options, but still, we just want you to choose one. Number one, we always want to end every episode with saying, when you connect with God, that's a great thing. But on this episode especially, find one way to connect with God each day this week. For some of you, that could be a 1-sentence prayer going down the road. For others of you going, I need to do my quiet time again, or whatever that is for you, just choose one way to connect with God each day this week.
Yeah.
Or number 2, you can meet a relational need of your spouse. Just choose one that maybe you haven't been meeting so well. And you can find the 10 relational needs on our show notes. But what is that one relational needs you feel like I could do a little bit better at this? Yeah. Practice that this week. Or finally, number 3, just find one person to hang out with who encourages you and supports you, that's someone other than your spouse. And again, pick someone that's safe.
Yeah, so pick one of those 3, and I'll jump in because I already know which one of those 3 is going to be for me, and it's going to be the first one, connecting with God. And so what I'm kind of thinking is when I walk in the door when I get home, that's usually the time I'm probably jumping in and relying on Terry to fill those relational and needs in me the most. But when I get home, I pretty much always, every weekday, I go for a mile or 2 run just to decompress. But I usually get home and get all of, jump in with Terry and then go run. And I think one thing that I can take away this week is to, when I get home, go for a run. And that's going to be my 10, 15, 20 minutes to connect with God and just kind of decompress a little bit and then walk into the house without jumping on Terry and expecting her to meet all of those relational needs. Does that make sense?
No, it does. Tell me how a run for you is like, this is my time with God. Because I think that some people listen, they just think it's some big spiritual thing. I got to start a long journal or...
Right. Well, I mean, I'm going to have to figure this out, but I don't know. You said a few minutes ago that Nancy loves like listening to worship music and that kind of a thing. And that's kind of what sparked that. But just being intentional about those 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes,
that's great.
Just to connect with God and look to him to fulfill some of my to meet me in some of my frustrations so that I'm not pouring all of that on Terry and expecting her, that first 30 minutes I'm at home to be my comforter, to be my, the person that's supporting me and encouraging me when I'm probably at my worst.
You know what I love, CJ, and this was one of the reasons I so wanted you on this podcast, is for people that are listening, that's really attainable. Like, that's really to go, okay, I'm going to go take a 15, 20-minute run, and that's going to matter. I am wondering why 1 minute takes you 20 minutes. 1 mile takes you 20 minutes. But we'll talk about that later.
A mile or 2 or 3, whatever.
Yeah. You're brisk walking.
Yeah, brisk
okay,
walking.
Yeah, I got you.
All right. We get that you work out, CJ.
Yeah.
Got it.
Can't you tell?
Cool. Really cool that you run every day. That's like a really cool thing about you. My thing is going to be... obviously finding something that I need to be feeling in my spouse that I'm probably not relationally. So just from the list that we went over at the beginning of the 10 things, like the one that definitely reached out to me was appreciation. Like thanking Hudson and praising him for things he's done, or just like showing that I notice when he's put effort into something. Like I think a lot of times I kind of like breeze over that stuff and I'm like, great, thanks, got my coffee, bye. Like, and he wakes up early every morning and makes coffee for us both. So I think for me, it's going to be just trying to be more appreciative and filling that relational need for him.
Yeah, I'm saying for me, I'm looking at this list for Nancy and I see the word support. And we have 3 very busy kids who have all started back fall sports, with lacrosse and football. And I've realized they've been into it for 2 weeks and I haven't done my fair share of picking them up and making sure that's happening. She doesn't say anything. She's not like rolled her eyes or anything, but I'm sitting there going, oh, I think I went for a run last night during the time that I could have been taking the kid to lacrosse. And so I think for me to go, I need to pull back. And just because she doesn't get frustrated about that doesn't mean that's not a need that she has, which is for support. So that's kind of my go-to.
That's a good
That's
one.
awesome. Well, Ted, thank you so much for leading us through this conversation. I know that was a lot of material to cover and all of these relational needs, and it can feel overwhelming.
Sure.
So thank you for helping us distill this down into the one simple thing that we can take away and really just take into our marriages. And thank you for joining us for the Married People podcast. We hope that today's episode helped you realize that marriage is a little easier than you think. And if you enjoyed today's episode, we would love for you to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. Leave a review while you're there on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts, because your review helps us make this podcast better and get these conversations in front of more people who need to hear them. And finally, for more great resources to make your marriage better, check out Ted's book, Your Best Us. You can find it on Amazon or wherever you buy your books, and visit our website, marriedpeople.org. You can find all of our show notes for this episode right there. And join us for next week's episode, where we'll be asking the question, how does our mindset impact our marriage? Until next time, I'm CJ.
I'm Afton.
I'm Ted.
And thank you for listening.